Chapter 1 Origins Sour Candy, Bitter Truth. Once upon a time, there was a maiden lost in fog and shadow, wandering path after path of endless grey stone. She could not remember how she came to be here, in this seemingly infinite landscape. Had she always walked these corridors, or was this merely a dream from which she could not wake? The cold stone walls felt both foreign and familiar, a prison that had somehow become home. One truth alone pierced the haze. This was where she belonged. This was what she deserved. This was her destiny. Step after step, she walked the endless paths in a trance, in dejected acceptance of her thoughts and grief. She kept one hand always trailing along the stone walls that was so cold it burned her flesh. Though the touch brought pain, she dared not release it, for deep within herself she felt dire consequences for letting go. But had she ever tried? Had she ever let go? She could never bring herself to focus on it. There were only steps, only stone, and only fog that always danced ahead just beyond reach, while behind, self-judgment whispered on the wind, adding weight to her feet, making every step more laborious than the last. Though she told herself that she wanted to seek escape, did she truly search? Was there even a way out to search for? Such thoughts felt like deep betrayal. After all, this was meant to be her life, her penance, and who was she to desire better? Sometimes, between the ancient stones, there were small cracks. When she stopped to peer through, there were brilliant beams of light, so bright, so full of color that they nearly blinded her. Yet, she would turn her head and pretend not to see them. Instead, kept walking past them, eyes downcast. The light was not for her. The cold grey stone was what she deserved. While you're here, if you would consider subscribing to help my tiny egg of a channel, I would be so appreciative. Thank you. Welcome back, Nuggets. This mother clucker has some thoughts. Let's ruffle some feathers and get into the video. Okay, my Nuggets, this is not the video I was planning to make, but it is the video that is being made, and it is going to be quite a dark one. Now, if you are familiar with my previous content, you kind of know how I feel about trigger warnings because you get what you get with some of this content. However, I do feel that some of the themes that I will be discussing in this video are not necessarily foreseen. So I do want to give you a heads up that there's some pretty serious conversation around DV, various intensities to certain substances, if you get my drift, and generally it's quite bleak. So if you feel like any of that is going to affect your psychological well-being in any way, I'll catch you on the next video. Originally, I was getting ready to go to chapter 1 for Candy, just like I'm doing with my Eugenia series and working through in a chronological order. In my discovery of Candy, however, I found that she had zero social media presence prior to 2016, which got me digging. And my Nuggets, I have seen some things. I have been places, and I was shocked. I might be a little naive because I understand that on her YouTube bio, she does describe that she has done some egg-centric interest modeling, which I kind of thought was just going to be some like photographs and maybe some like cam work or whatever. But no, she was in fact a full corn star and had a whole career in it for many years. So that's why there's just nothing prior to that, because at a certain point she decided to get out of it and moved to YouTube full time. I will be doing that kind of early years discovery video for you next in this series. But for today, I just wanted to temporarily jump ahead in her timeline because in 2017, which is the year that she really started taking her YouTube channel seriously. In February of 2017, she actually did an origins video. The period of time that has been missing, basically, I think it covers it really well. So I've decided to dedicate a whole video exclusively to this video. The video was released on the 25th of February, and it's called Introduction and the Origin Story of a Once Feral Child, in case you want to go see it. It is like a 48-minute video, so I have very, very heavily edited this one down, and also I've censored some areas as well. So if you want to see the whole thing, definitely go check out her website. I will link it below. But before we get into it, I did just want to say that I did find it really beneficial, that first video that I did of hers, to kind of get a grasp of some behavioral habits that she has. And I was asking a lot of questions in that video about various things, and I really think that we get a lot of context in this video. So I'm really excited to go through it with you. Let's get started.
Hey y'all. Today I'm basically just gonna do a little introduction because I haven't really done one. I'm Candy. Some of you know me as Candy Godiva. I am an adult web model and actress. Have been since 2002. And of course, I've recently, in the last couple of months, discovered this mukbang thing and have jumped right on into it with little thought of mentioning my adult past, present, and future.
Okay, so at this time, although she started her YouTube channel in 2010, she really didn't start posting regularly until the very end of 2016 and into 2017. So she's a couple of months into that at this point, and apparently people found out her past and took exception to it. I don't know why anybody would take exception to it. I mean, it is what it is. It's a valid lifestyle. My only concern with somebody like Candy getting into an industry like that, and similar to that of Eugenia with something like YouTube, is that a career like that does not bring forward the usual milestones in adulthood that people go through. And I think the money and the success of that kind of field can bring, fairly young as well, can really kind of exacerbate that arrested development. And that would be my only concern with Candy. However, I did say young, but in 2002, when she started, she would have been 30. So I mean, there's that, but that doesn't necessarily mean, as we know from Eugenia, a 30-year-old woman does not necessarily mean a mature woman.
I just want to let people know who I am. I'm not trying to generate a fetish audience. I just want to do my thing. Also, I wanted to let people get to know me a little better personally. I've mentioned having kids. My boy is 18. My girl is 16. They don't live with me, but I love them so much. And I miss them. They live with their grandmother, their daddy's mama. She takes really good care of them.
So my timeline on Candy is still a little hazy, and she did mention that she's done a video on them, so we will probably catch up with this. But if she's saying her son is 18 and her daughter is 16 in 2017, then that means that the son must have been born around 1999 and the daughter must have been born around 2001, and then in 2002 she started the adult entertainment. I have also gleaned that she must have been married to their father at some point in the mid-90s, but by 2002 we know that she had a different boyfriend who seemed to be somebody with eccentric interests in the crop loading department if you get my drift. I hope everybody knows what I mean by crop loading. Just in case you don't, chickens, before their stomach, they have an area called a crop, and that's actually where the food sits until it's ready to go into the stomach. So crop loading, right? Stuffing lots of food in it. Yeah, okay, good. Same page. So the fact that she got into that adult entertainment with somebody with those kind of eccentric interests, I think is quite telling.
And I get to see them on social media, and we talk all the time. And
have you guys ever watched body language analysts? I find them interesting. I know it's a little bit more of an art form than a science, but I found it really interesting that when she said she speaks to them all the time, she actually did an action that covered her mouth, which could indicate deception. Could be totally reading into it, but that's what I do. It doesn't sound like she has a great relationship with her kids, and I am interested to learn more about that. I also find it interesting that as we go through this video, we will learn that she was raised by her grandparents, and now her children are being raised by their grandparents. So we have a little bit of a familial legacy going on.
They know everything I do, and they understand that it's just a job and that I'm a grown-up and it's my life, and they love me anyway.
I'm interested about that. I can understand the 18-year-old knowing. I suppose 16 is not out of the realm of. I wonder how long they've known what she was doing. I suppose if you're a parent, there must be a lot of parents out there in that kind of industry, and they must have to navigate these challenges. I know nothing of this department, so if anybody has personal experience and they would like to share, I would be interested to hear about that.
My mother mentioned that she got pregnant with me the first time her and my daddy ever had sex on a 1969 Harley Davidson hardtail. She said what they called that back then when you got pregnant the very first time was a shooting star. And I thought that was funny because, you know, it's one of those things you burn bright and you fade away, you know. I figure that's just me. That's the way I'm gonna live my life. I'm gonna burn bright and fade away pretty fast.
And remember that we've learned from the first video that I've done on Candy is that anytime she's laughing, this is not a happy thing. It's really a kind of anxious response that she has, I think, to the things that she's talking about, a way to distance herself from what she's saying. If you listen to those words where she has defined her life as a shooting star that burns bright and then fades away, these kinds of pigeonholes that people put themselves in, or that parents put their children in potentially, can be really, really dangerous. And it's really worth paying attention to, you know, what you say about yourself or what you let others say about you, because to have been labeled from literally conception as a shooting star that is just going to fade away, well, Candy's gone and run with that and has really made that her life. She's had this massive sensational career and is now left broke and broken financially and physically, and is now fading away. And I think that is an incredible waste of a human life. And I don't think she deserved to have that put on her. And I definitely don't think that she should have put that on herself.
Live fast, die young, leave a beautiful corpse. No, I don't want to die young. I really don't. I've got to get a handle on my health, and I intend to. I really do. I mean, there's so much I have to do to take care of myself. It's one day at a time. One day at a time. I'm not ready yet. Not ready yet. The clock's ticking on it, though.
So I found this particularly interesting. She is aware that she needs to take care of her health because this lifestyle that she's been living for many years is not sustainable. And she's aware that there's a clock ticking, but she's actually got again, some real self-awareness, saying she's not ready. That is being incredibly honest. And this is 2017. So, 8 years later, she's still saying exactly the same thing with one day at a time and still trying to get her health under control. And I think what's really sad about this is that at this point, this Candy that we're looking at really could have made some quality change in her life had she have acted now. Whereas in 2025, when we're looking at her, it's looking so much harder at this point.
Okay, back to my story. My mom and my daddy were both heroin addicts, so addictive behavior runs in my family. My grandparents were alcoholics, so it just pretty much sets me up for addictive behaviors for the rest of my life.
Sorry about the censoring there. So in case you didn't catch it, 2 substances were mentioned there, one beginning with an H and one beginning with an A. That is technically legal. Once again, we're kind of dealing with that familial legacy going on. I do want to kind of tread carefully here though, because a lot of people have that kind of thing in their family history, and a lot of people are aware of it. And I can tell you that personally, I definitely have it in my family history. And as a result, I have always really been on high alert for anything that has those physiological addictive qualities, because I just don't think it's worth tangling with. If you happen to have that in your genetics, I don't know, but to me, it was never even worth looking at. And of course, with Candy, and with myself too, actually, there is that element of food addiction coming in, which is much more challenging because it is completely legal and completely accessible and relatively cheap to access as well. And to a point, you need the food to live. To a point, I don't like this particular argument because, food can be used very differently. But if she knew this about herself, perhaps setting up a lifestyle that would have led to success would have been better, but we will get into it.
My mother, she didn't know she was pregnant with me. If she had, I would have been one of 8 abortions, but I somehow slipped through, and she was 5 months pregnant with me before she knew. It's like basically I wasn't supposed to be here. I'm living kind of on borrowed time anyway.
Okay, so another thing that she's pigeonholed herself with. So now we've got a shooting star that will burn bright and fade away and wasn't supposed to be here and is living on borrowed time. So this is horribly devaluing her life in a way that kind of, you look at what has happened to her and the way that she's been running her life and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. It's not fair and it's not right, but you can see this legacy, this thing that she's been telling herself or perhaps being told about herself, and she's just going ahead and living it out.
And I think she loved me in her own way, but from what I could tell, she was pretty much just jealous of me for most of my life because my grandparents, when they took me,
I just wanted to stop her here. She's kind of doing a stream of consciousness in this video, and she never actually finishes this thought. So I think based on the research that I did, what she was trying to say is that her mother was jealous of her because it was her mother's parents that took her in and raised her. So perhaps it's a situation where Candy was perceived to have a better childhood than what her mother did, which is, it makes sense because when you're parents, you make all the mistakes. And then when you're grandparents, you know the mistakes that you've made, so you don't get to make those mistakes again. But I think that's where she was going with that.
I was passed around to babysitters and just neglected, very, very neglected. I was smart as a whip, though. There was one time when I was 2 years old, I think, or almost 2. I was walking. I was walking, obviously, because I packed up a little knapsack, put it on the end of a stick, a little bandana on the end of a stick. I must have seen it somewhere, and I went and ran away.
So it's hard to tell with these memories that Candy talks about as to whether or not the age is accurate or if the memory is accurate. And of course, none of us really know if our memories are accurate because they're memories of memories of memories. But to have a 2-year-old pack up and tie up a bandana to run away from home, I don't know if that sounds like a 2-year-old thing, but I think where she's trying to put the memory is that she was still with her parents at that time that happened. So I think there might be a discrepancy either in the memory or in the timeline. But, this is her story, so she's got to tell it.
Yeah, my grandparents basically came to get me when my mother had gone into rehab. But my daddy, he was out and he was off somewhere, and I was left alone in the trailer. And my grandparents came and they found me, and I was filthy, malnourished, little distended belly, and I looked like I'd been starved plumb almost to death.
So we're really seeing some pretty hefty early childhood trauma going on there. And I think it's already becoming apparent why food has become a factor in her life the way that it has. And although if 2 is the correct age for this, the body should be able to bounce back with no problem, but the brain remembers, if you get my drift. So I've heard of a few people doing this where food was at a premium or an issue very young in life, then it almost becomes a source of comfort to make sure that there's an abundance of it later in life. I think that makes sense. But yeah, it's bleak. It sounds like her mother had really, really serious issues. It sounds like her father had really, really serious issues. I would be inclined to even bring into question how fit the grandparents were for raising a child, since they were the ones that raised the mother. But that's not always the case, is it? Like, collectively, I think we can agree this is not a good start to life.
They couldn't take me anywhere. I would fight. I would bite them. I would scream. I didn't want to be touched. And I'm just really sad that I put them through that. I put those people through hell from day one.
So I believe that this is the root of Candy's issue right here. She's just starting to talk about it, and she will talk about it in much greater detail. But she is in her mid-40s here, and while I don't think there is a timeline for acceptance and working through trauma at all, I do find it quite telling that she's gotten this far through life and is still this affected by it. So what I'm thinking we're seeing here is that she has regret and she has grief, and at no point in her life has she ever actually dealt with that. Instead, she's just been covering it up or looking the other way, like we know that she's really good at doing in that denial kind of territory. And I'm a firm believer that when you're dealing with trauma or grief, anything of that description, the longer you put it off dealing with it, the more it's going to fester. It's almost like you're paying interest on the time that you managed to, get away with, in a sense. And considering that she's this upset at 45, and we just heard in the last video that she cried in therapy for the first time at 52, like, clearly she's just been holding on to this. She's not allowing herself to deal with it.
But they loved me, and they brought me back to health, and they calmed me with food. Food was my reward.
So it makes sense how we're seeing her crop loading seeding disorder taking form. So we're not only seeing that there wasn't enough food very, very early on, and now we're seeing that the food is being used as a positive reinforcement. So yeah, of course, a brain is going to connect those two. Oh, I was in a really bad state when I didn't have food, and now I'm really happy when I do have food, so let's have food.
Not long after that, my mama, she got away from my daddy. My daddy was very violent. He had been a boxer too, so he was, when he hits you hard. I'm pretty sure she got really hurt a lot. And I heard this from my stepfather later on in life. And I heard it from my grandfather too. But it wasn't like he was innocent either.
So she's talking about being surrounded by all of these, say, physically intense men in her life. So she's describing her father, but she's also describing her grandfather, and the stepfather comes up later too. So, and I also found that in a forum in her past, she had been discussing being with men that were exactly the same way. So again, we have this familial legacy just moving through generation after generation after generation, all accepting the same thing, all not requiring more or better, which is potentially on the parents to say, hey, I went through this and I want better for you. And has Candy had this conversation with her daughter? Because, you know, there's just another line there waiting for that to happen. But I think generally speaking, there have been some studies on this, but generally speaking with familial legacies, it really seems to take a really big thing to cause change. Whereas in a normal dynamic, people can grow up healthy with healthy milestones and they can kind of become themselves. But when there's trauma associated, it seems to be that something really dire needs to happen to make that the youngest generation go, wow, I need to change this. This is not okay, and I want better for myself. But it seems that that hasn't happened in Candy's situation.
But yeah, my origin story is kind of hard for me to deal with. I was a feral child. Might as well have been raised by wolves.
Okay, so again, this labeling, this language is so important because now we have a feral shooting star fading out and on borrowed time. And it's not correct for her to say, I was a feral child, I may have been raised by wolves. Because no matter how bleak her situation, a lot of people have experienced this in their childhood as well and have gone on to create very good things of themselves and to really succeed in spite of their beginning. It's not always a defining feature that needs to dictate the rest of your life, but that's how Candy has taken it. And I'm sure that there's some of you that are listening at the moment that have had this experience or known somebody with this experience. And rather than turning around and having some fight in her to say, no, I am standing up and changing this, she's just gone and embraced everything. And I hate that for her. I don't think that it's too late for her to turn that around. But at this point in time, we're now dealing with 52 years of her brainwashing herself to say that she is a feral shooting star living on borrowed time. And what kind of narrative is that for anybody to live under?
It's just left alone most of the time to fend for myself.
So when she says that she was left alone most of the time to fend for herself, I am unclear whether she is just speaking about the first couple of years of her life where she was living with her parents, or did her grandparents then turn around and do the same thing? I don't know. She doesn't ever really clarify. If it's the first one, though, she is defining her entire life, 52 years of it, based on the first 2 years of her life. I do understand. I understand the mentality that she's in. I have definitely been there. But think about who you were at 2 and think about who you are now. Does that have any bearing on your life in any way, shape, or form? Because the point that I'm trying to make is in my life, my mother created an atmosphere where I was like a doll who was to be put up on a shelf, all pretty and perfect, not to be played with, never allowed to get messed up or dirty in any way. Don't speak, don't play, just sit there and look pretty, be useless. And this is why I relate to Eugenia so well. And I spent far too much of my life listening to that pigeonhole, that set of words that was put on myself. And I really believe there was something wrong with me. I was useless and that I was missing something that everybody else seemed to have. And it's just such a disservice to your life if you're to take on any of these things that are put on you, but also the words that you put on yourself. And anyone who's listening that resonates with this, I really challenge you to think about what are those words that you're telling yourself of who you are. And do those words benefit your life in any way? Just some food for thought. Have a think.
But in Baltimore, my mama came. She had gotten out of rehab and she realized I was gone. And that's when I learned that she did love me, I guess. She came up there and she spent New Year's with me. That's the first time I ever tasted champagne. I was only 3 years old, but she gave me some champagne. Budding alcoholic.
So she didn't say how old her mother was when she had her. Given the series of events that have been described, I kind of get the picture that maybe her mother was quite young herself when she had her. And we're just seeing bad decision after bad decision after bad decision from her mother. And like at this point, really the mature thing for the mother to do if she knew that she couldn't be the mother that Candy needed would be to just step out. But instead, we've gotten out of rehab and that's great. No more H, but let's give our 3-year-old champagne. These are the life decisions she's making.
There was so much violence then. I witnessed my grandfather at one point cussing her out and calling her a whore and punching her in the face and busted her jaw. I mean, it's no wonder she got with violent men. Being raised by a man like that. And my granddaddy was a wonderful man, too. I worship my granddaddy. It's so horrible that I could think so highly of someone that could actually do that. And he was violent with me at times, too.
I think this is really showcasing what Candy perceives she deserves in life and what is acceptable behavior for her in her life. And granted, she's a child and a teenager while she's living with her grandparents, but the fact that she's an adult and saying some of the things that her grandfather did to her, she goes into in the video, she probably shouldn't be saying that he's such a great man for having done that. And I do understand the duality. I mean, I don't think people are all good or all evil. And of course, somebody can be physically intense while also being very caring, right? Or nurturing, or a father figure, or whatever it was that she saw in him. But to be able to stand up and say that you require a minimum of respect from your loved ones around you, I don't know that that's something that Candy has ever thought about or done for herself. I really get the sense from her that she feels for some reason that her life is worth less than everybody else around her. And while there are a couple of individuals throughout history that I might agree with that, I don't think Candy's one of them. And I don't think that her life is innately worth less. I wish somebody had said this to her.
And there's so much more to the story. Yeah, being a feral child, I think that's like the worst of it. I think that was the start of my becoming fat, the first stage of my starvation, and the loss of my metabolism from being starved to being fed. It's like, here, have a cookie, here, eat some pie, here, have a piece of cake, here, this will make you feel better.
I do just have a criticism here. She is right that messing with food intake in that way can affect your thyroid. Speaking from personal experience here, it absolutely can mess with your metabolism in a way that makes it very easy to gain weight and very difficult to lose it. However, 2 points. One is that can be medicated and managed if it's just like a blood test. It's not a big deal. 2, children are much more likely to bounce back from that sort of thing than adults are. So if she's still speaking about her childhood at the moment, it is possible that for a time it was a bit messed up, but it could have been managed with appropriate nutrition and exercise, and maybe medication, I don't know at that age. But the point being, again, there's just this heavy layer of acceptance of her fate. This is just her. This is just what she has to do. It's her body, and she's just in complete acceptance of that. And I think the thing that I struggle with most about Candy, and Eugenia for that matter, is that I don't see any fight left in them. I don't know if there was fight. I don't know if it's a case that they just weren't capable of the fight, or if they never challenged themselves to fight. But there's just full on laying down, completely accepting the miserable existence. Everything else I can get my head around. It's just that is a big sticking point for me. And I don't know. Tell me what you think. Do you think fight is something innate, or do you think it's something that is grown and fought for in a sense?
You know, by the time I was in first and second grade, I was a balloon, and I was being put on a 500 calorie a day diet to starve again.
And that's rough. That is hard, because how do you have that conversation with a child without it affecting their self-image or their confidence? And how do you do it without making them feel starved, which is clearly a trigger point for her? I don't know. I don't know how you do that. I think maybe prevention is key here, but then she's caught in this cycle of feeling starved and then wanting to eat, and this is just perpetuating itself, and we're just seeing the first iteration of that here.
Just eat, and then starve, and it wreaks havoc on your metabolism.
And she is right there. If it is a cyclic, ongoing thing, she may have been having trouble. None of us were there. None of us could possibly know if this was being managed correctly. Given some of the descriptions of the adults in her life, I think that there needs to be a serious question mark over the efficacy of their parenting, but without coming down on people that I do not know anything about other than what this woman is telling me. It's a tricky cycle to break at that age, and then of course she's continued it on.
And at one point I just decided, okay, no more diets.
And that right there answers a great deal of the questions that I had in my first video for her. She has the language of wanting to change her life, of wanting to lose weight, of wanting to get healthy, but then her actions will contradict that. And I think this right here is the why that's happening. Because she has gotten to this age without dealing with any of her trauma, she still carries it with her. It is highly triggering for her to do any sort of restrictive food kind of plan. And unfortunately, she's gotten herself into a physical condition where she can't just work out either. So that means the only option she's got is to restrict and count calories. But then she triggers herself with the undealt with trauma, and then she wants to crop load again. So it's a really vicious cycle that she's got herself in. And I don't know if, given that and the lack of fight that she has and the age and the ailments that she's got at the moment, I don't know if this ends well. And I'm so sorry to say that.
So when I say I'm happy, I can be happy, but I carry so much sadness. Not just for my nanny, but for my grandfather. Because, yeah, we might have had our rounds, we might have butted heads. You know, he might have choked me down a couple of times, but damn it, I might have had it coming, because, you know, I was not an easy teenager to raise. I might have just been one of the worst kids. I was awful. I said awful things to him. You know, I wish you were dead and all that good stuff. You know, it's just things kids do, I guess.
So firstly, what she describes here, she is still so clearly locked into her guilt as to how she treated her grandparents in her youth. Like as a teenager, when she's hormone soup, plus the ridiculous upbringing that she had to navigate herself through. So I think anybody from an outside perspective would go, it's absolutely no wonder that you were a difficult teenager. That is fine. That is acceptable. But she has completely locked herself into that guilt. And it does make me wonder one of two things. Either she is using the guilt as a crutch and as a comfort and safety mechanism as an excuse to not move forward, because it keeps her in this state where she needs to be looked after, which is something that I mentioned in my first video. The other thing that I think, given the severity of her reactions while she's talking about this, which, by the way, she's not there yet, you'll see that a little bit later, but I think there may be things that happen that she's not talking about. I think there's things that she feels like is acceptable to say socially, and I think then there's probably the truth underneath that. So I think it's helpful to maybe listen to this moving forward with the mindset of, okay, there might be something more than just the words that are being put on the table here.
But still, I'm gonna feel shitty about it now because I was in my early 20s when they all passed. And they all passed so quickly. Grandmother passed in January of 1994. And my mother passed in February of 1994. Then my grandfather, he literally started falling to pieces. And he spent the next 2 years mourning their loss. I mean, he was so strong up until then, but his organs started failing, his teeth started falling apart.
So this makes sense to me. She's 22 when those two pretty key figures in her life passed. And then she doesn't actually say the date that her grandfather passed, but it sounds like it was not too far after, like within a couple of years. At that age, she's already gone through the childhood that we've heard about. She's gone through a very tumultuous teenagehood. Then she's just probably starting to get her footing as kind of an adult. Sorry to the young 20s that are listening to me, but you'll get it shortly. You're not there yet. Trust me. But she has it. It's like she's just kind of at the point in her life where she's trying to find stability, and then it's like the rug gets pulled from under her. But she's still telling herself that she needs to feel bad about this now. That language. I'm going to feel bad about it now.
God, and there were other really messed up things that happened to me. Oh man, I don't know if I should get into all that now or save it for other story times, but there were things that happened with my stepfather. I've suffered a lot of crazy crap. There's a lot of things that are very weighing on me as a person.
The topic relating to her stepfather, she didn't really elaborate on. I did censor it. It's in her video. It's probably what you're thinking. That is absolutely abhorrent and disgusting. I found it interesting that she said all of this stuff is weighing on her as a person. And isn't it almost like she's taken all of this undealt with trauma and all of the weight of that psychologically and transferred it to literal weight on her? And I wonder if there's an element of a security blanket in that weight, or if that's her saying, I have to have this weight because I feel the psychological weight. And the trouble is, we were watching those videos of her in her 50s, without this stuff being dealt with food being her coping mechanism, how could she ever possibly hope to overcome this? And the level of trauma that she's talking about takes a while to deal with. And I don't know if she has that kind of time at the moment. And yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer for Candy. I really wish that at this stage in her life, she had have said, I'm ready, I'm doing it, I'm doing this for me. Or at least for her kids, something like that.
I carry this guilt around with me like a badge, I guess. This shame that I couldn't be better. That I just couldn't. I couldn't be different. I couldn't be more helpful. I couldn't just pull myself together and get better. I couldn't pull myself out of my own grief so I could be a mama to my children. My grief was too strong. I can't even hold a job because of this.
Okay, so with in our minds, remembering that I don't think everything's been said here, because see, this doesn't make sense. Oh, so you told your grandfather you hated him, so now you're going to carry this guilt. It doesn't make sense. That's why I think there's something else. But I just want to take a poll, my nuggets, if you would amuse me for a moment. Hands up, who has ever been lying in bed at night when it's really quiet and it's dark and you've relived those horrifying memories that you deeply regret and that you cringe at and that you wish you could go back and do differently. Did anybody keep their hand down? Like, really? Anybody? My point being that these things happen in our lives. And I think that, or I hope that, I know that when you have the ability to be able to look back with regret, it's because you've grown enough to be able to look back and have regret. Otherwise, if there was no growth at all, there would be no regret, right? You'd be like, yeah, I was awesome. I did the right thing. And I struggle with reconciling in my brain that everybody deals with this stuff. Everybody has lost, everybody has messed up in their life, and everybody has these things. And granted, her situation is quite heavy. It doesn't stop people from living their life. For the most part, people get on with it. People have their responsibilities. People manage to reconcile within themselves that, yes, that's who I was and I'm not proud of that. So I'm going to make sure that I'm a different person moving forward. For her to keep herself locked in this guilt and in this grief still, these people died in the 90s. This is 2017. This is not that long ago. It's too long. And so it doesn't make sense. So is it that there's something horrendous that she really needed to work through? Or is it that she's holding on? Is it that she's not letting go because she won't let go?
Maybe that's why I was just okay with doing the adult stuff, because my granddaddy was gone. My granddaddy would have disapproved, but I don't know. I might have done it just to spite him at one point in time. I know I married my husband probably just to spite him. My grandparents didn't even know I was getting married. That's what an asshole I was. That changed me. Losing my family, that changed me. That really did. And that made me really rethink my whole life. Like, you really don't know what you have until it's gone. I was so thankless.
It's almost like a reverse aha moment, isn't it? Like, she had this massive life event. And I think when you're faced with these kind of things, there's two ways you can take it. And you can either go, my life has just been flipped upside down. I've lost the people that I cared so much about and I have these regrets. And so I am going to dwell on that for the rest of my life. Or my life has been flipped upside down and I've lost all of these people and I have these regrets. So I'm going to make sure that I don't make any more regrets, right? And it seems like this, I know I said this in my last video too, this learned helplessness, which I do think has a valid foundation. However, it is not serving her life anymore and wouldn't have been for many years. And so to be able to have the strength to be able to stand up and say, I'm doing this for me, but of course she doesn't think she's worth anything.
So that's me. That's a lot of me. And it's probably not even enough. It's probably just created more questions. But that's why I'm so sad. There's been a lot of loss in my life. And there's a lot of guilt that I just can't let go. Even to the detriment of my own children. And that creates more guilt and more shame. And I feel like more of a loser. And I can't hold a regular job because I couldn't make it through a day without falling apart at some point. Or having some sort of panic attack, freak out because people are staring at me or...
Okay, so when she's talking about that she can't even hold a job because she'll have a panic attack or a freak out, she'll fall to pieces. I really understand that. That resonates a lot with me because I was taught to be so useless and to think that I was so less than. I really felt that I didn't have what it took to do that normal adult stuff. And I also, struggled with anxiety in a very big way because of that, especially when I started, making all the mistakes at work as a 20-something that really get done as a teenager. But you can just hear that rolling. It just keeps going, that self-pity of that, she couldn't even pull it together for her kids. She couldn't be a better daughter. She couldn't get out of her grief. She feels like a loser. She can't hold a job. These are These are all constant things that she's telling herself that are adding to the weight of her psychologically and probably physiologically as well. And none of it's actually based in fact, because what she's discussing there, well, she couldn't be better for her kids, but she could have been better for her kids, and she could still be better for her kids. And she's saying that she couldn't have been a better daughter. Well, that's done now because we can't go back, so we need to move forward. She's saying that she can't hold a job because she'll have panic attacks for people looking at her in public. Well, then get a work at home job. Those exist. There's these things that she's telling herself that are factually inaccurate and very easily disprovable, but they're so damaging.
No, I hadn't mentioned mental illnesses. I have mild agoraphobia as well as social anxiety. So this in itself has been really difficult. And I know I'm going to be judged in all kinds of ways for this. Thanks for joining me, and I don't think I'm even gonna ask for likes, because honestly, what's to like about this? But thank you anyway. Bye.
Okay, so yeah, that is Candy's origin story. And just to give her credit there, I do think it is brave to put this kind of thing on the internet. Speaking from personal experience, you know, some of the stuff that I've said in some of my videos, I get to the editing portion and I'm like, yes, I guess I'm putting that on the internet. It's hard and it is scary. I do wish that doing this kind of thing had have been as a catalyst to start to grow, like to almost go, here, this is my whole life laid out. I've got nothing else to hide. So this is my jumping off point to, you know, start doing something better for my life. I don't know, because I haven't gone through all of her history. I don't think that that's what this was. I think this was, unfortunately, I think Candy has developed a coping mechanism of wrapping herself in self-pity, so that really if you're the person that says anything bad about her, you're the cluckwit, because look at how weak and pathetic she is. How could you possibly say anything bad about her? And I don't think that is a beneficial way for her to live her life. So yeah, here I am being a cluckwit, I guess. Anyway, look guys, that was a really heavy video. If you're still here listening to me, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But tell me what you think about this situation. Is this new to you? Had you seen this video before? And do you have any insights on anything else in her very, very early years? Because I've been doing quite a bit of research and I will be doing that video next. So I hope you enjoyed it. But that's all the clucks I have left to give today. Stay golden, my little nuggets, and I'll catch you next time.
Hey,